They told me my great aunt died penniless in a state-run nursing home. They told me I was the difficult child who did not deserve a seat at the family table. But as I stand here today holding a gold-plated key to a vault my father never knew existed, I realize the woman who raised me did not just leave me a fortune. She left me a weapon. And today I am finally pulling the trigger. Before I tell you what happened, take a moment to subscribe to the channel. If you love emotional stories filled with secrets, betrayal, and unforgettable justice. Like this video, share it with someone who loves powerful storytelling, and tell me in the comments where you are watching from and what time it is in your part of the world. I always love seeing how far these stories travel. For most of my life, I believed I was the mistake nobody wanted to talk about. Every family has that one person who somehow ends up carrying all the blame. The one blamed for problems they never created. The one pushed into the shadows while everyone else pretends they never existed. That person was me. My name is Leo. When I was 14 years old, my life changed with a single bus ticket. I still remember the morning clearly. My father would not look me in the eyes. My stepmother Evelyn stood beside him with her arms crossed and an expression that looked strangely satisfied. She spoke softly, but every word felt sharp. She told me it was for the best. She told me I needed structure. She told me I would be happier somewhere else. Nobody asked what I wanted. Nobody asked how I felt. By noon, I was standing alone at a bus station with one backpack and a ticket that would take me hundreds of miles away from everything I had ever known. I watched my father's car disappear down the road. He never looked back. At 14 years old, I learned something that would stay with me forever. Sometimes abandonment does not happen in dramatic moments. Sometimes it happens quietly. Sometimes the people who are supposed to protect you simply decide you are no longer convenient. The bus carried me north toward the rocky coastline of Maine. Hour after hour, forests rolled past the window. The farther I traveled, the more distant my old life felt. I kept waiting for my phone to ring. I kept expecting my father to call and tell me there had been a mistake. The call never came. When the bus finally arrived, it was nearly dark. Cold ocean air swept across the station. Waiting near the entrance stood a woman wrapped in a heavy gray coat. She was older than I expected. Her silver hair moved in the wind. Her face was serious and unreadable. This was Aunt Eliza, the woman everyone in my family called the hermit. The woman they rarely spoke about. The woman they treated like an embarrassment. She looked at me for a few seconds before taking my backpack. Then she nodded toward her truck. "Come on," she said. That was all. No hugs. No speeches. No questions. Just come on. For some reason that felt more honest than anything my family had said to me in years. The drive to her house took nearly an hour. Dark waves crashed against cliffs below the winding roads. The sky was filled with stars. I remember staring out the window wondering if I would ever see my father again. Aunt Eliza seemed to sense what I was thinking. Without taking her eyes off the road, she spoke. "Stop looking behind you." I turned toward her. "What?" She tightened her grip on the steering wheel. "People who want to leave your life will leave. Chasing them only teaches them they were right." I did not answer. At 14 years old, I was too angry to understand her. Years later, those words would save me. Her house sat alone on a stretch of coastline surrounded by wild gardens and towering pines. It was old, weathered, beautiful in a way that expensive things never are. Inside, everything smelled of cedarwood, herbs, and old books. There were shelves filled with journals, boxes filled with documents, drawers packed with papers. At the time, it all looked like clutter. I had no idea I was standing inside the most important archive of my life. The first few months were difficult. I missed my friends. I missed school. I even missed the father who had abandoned me. Every night I wondered what my family was doing. Every holiday I checked my phone hoping for a message. Nothing ever came. Not on my birthday. Not on Christmas. Not when I graduated. Not when I turned 18. Years passed. Silence became normal. First it hurt. Then it became something else. Freedom. Aunt Eliza never treated me like a burden. She taught me practical things. How to repair broken pipes. How to grow herbs. How to manage money. How to read contracts. How to spot lies. She believed knowledge was the only protection nobody could take away. At night she sat at an old wooden desk writing in leather-bound ledgers. Every entry was precise. Every date recorded. Every transaction documented. Every conversation noted. Sometimes I would ask why she spent so much time keeping records. She would smile faintly. Then she would tap her finger against my chest. Leo, the world listens to the loudest voice. But the truth belongs to the one who keeps the records. Back then I thought she was eccentric. I thought it was just one of her strange sayings. I did not understand she was preparing me for a war I did not even know existed. As the years passed, Aunt Eliza became more than family. She became my home. The person who showed up every single day. The person who never lied to me. The person who taught me my worth was not determined by the people who abandoned me. And because of her, I stopped waiting for my family to come back. I built a life. A real life. One that belonged to me. Then 6 months ago everything changed. Aunt Eliza died. The phone call came early in the morning. For a moment the world stopped. The house felt impossibly quiet. The garden she loved seemed empty. Even the ocean sounded different. I organized the funeral myself. I sent invitations. I informed every member of the family. Not one of them came. Not my stepmother. Not my half-sister. Not a single relative. The woman they had ignored for decades left this world without any of them standing beside her grave. I told myself it did not matter. I told myself I expected it. But standing there alone beside the woman who had raised me felt like losing the last piece of solid ground beneath my feet. 3 weeks later my phone rang. The caller ID made my stomach tighten. Evelyn. My stepmother. The woman who had sent me away. For 12 years she had not called. Not once. Yet suddenly she wanted to talk. And the moment I heard her sweet voice floating through the speaker, I knew something was wrong. Very wrong. Because people do not ignore you for over a decade and suddenly remember your existence out of kindness. Especially people like Evelyn. And as I listened to her invitation, I had no idea I was about to walk straight into the most dangerous trap of my life. The moment Evelyn finished speaking, I stared at my phone in silence. Her voice still echoed in my ears. Sweet, warm, almost motherly. The same woman who had convinced my father to send me away now sounded as if she had spent the last decade worrying about my happiness. I knew better. People can change. But manipulation rarely does. Leo darling, she had said. We are gathering at Blackwood Mountain Lodge this weekend. A small family tribute for your father and Aunt Eliza. We have all been grieving. It is time we came together again. Together again. The words almost made me laugh. You cannot come together again when you were never together in the first place. Still, something about the invitation bothered me. Not because I believed her. Because I did not. Aunt Eliza used to say that lies reveal more than truth if you pay attention. And Evelyn's lie was obvious. My father had died years earlier. Nobody in that family had cared enough to call me. Now suddenly they wanted a memorial. Now suddenly they wanted family. No, something else was happening. The question was what? For 2 days I considered ignoring the invitation. Every instinct told me to stay home. But another voice inside me kept whispering, go, see what they want. Learn the truth. In the end, curiosity won. 3 days later I packed a bag and drove toward Blackwood Mountain Lodge. The storm arrived before I did. Snow hammered the highway. Wind shook the trees. The mountains disappeared behind curtains of white. By the time I reached the lodge, the world looked frozen. The building stood alone on a ridge overlooking dark forests. Massive stone walls. Tall windows glowing with warm light. The kind of place rich people used when they wanted to pretend they appreciated nature. I parked my truck and stepped into the storm. The moment I entered the lobby, I saw them. For a second, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. It felt less like a family reunion and more like two opposing armies seeing each other across a battlefield. Then Evelyn smiled. The performance began immediately. Leo. She crossed the room with open arms. Before I could react, she wrapped me in a hug. I stood frozen. The gesture felt unnatural. Like a stranger trying to recreate a memory she never earned. When she stepped back, I noticed something strange. Her smile never reached her eyes, not even for a second. "Look at you," she said. "It has been far too long. 12 years. 12 years without a phone call, without a birthday card, without a single visit." And now she wanted to talk about time. I simply nodded. Then another voice interrupted. "Big brother." I turned. Maya stood beside the fireplace. My half-sister. The last time I had seen her she was a child. Now she looked completely different. Elegant. Confident. Perfectly dressed. The image of success. She walked over and hugged me. Unlike Evelyn, her smile seemed genuine. At least at first. But something felt rehearsed. Like she had practiced this reunion in front of a mirror. "It's so good to see you," she said. I smiled politely. "It has been a while." The evening moved forward with uncomfortable politeness. Dinner was served. Wine flowed. Stories were shared. Everyone acted as if the previous 12 years had never happened. Nobody mentioned my exile. Nobody mentioned the funeral. Nobody mentioned the silence. Instead, they talked about family. The more they used that word, the more suspicious I became. Because real families do not need to constantly remind you they are family. The conversation eventually shifted toward Aunt Eliza. And that was when the questions started. Casually at first. Almost innocent. What happened to the house? Did she leave much behind? Was there any property paperwork? Any investments? Any valuables? Every question arrived disguised as concern. But beneath the surface I could see the hunger. They were fishing. Searching. Trying to discover something. I gave simple answers. The house was fine. The estate was being handled. Nothing unusual. Every answer seemed to frustrate them. Especially Evelyn. I noticed the way her eyes narrowed whenever I avoided details. Hours later, dinner finally ended. The storm outside had grown stronger. Snow covered the windows. Wind rattled the glass. Most guests headed to their rooms. I did the same. But sleep refused to come. Something felt wrong. The entire evening had carried an invisible tension. Like everyone was waiting for something. Around midnight, I finally got out of bed. The lodge was silent. Only the distant sound of the storm remained. I walked downstairs toward the kitchen, hoping a glass of water might help clear my head. That was when I heard voices. Faint. Angry. Coming from the study. I stopped immediately. The door was slightly open. Light spilled into the hallway. At first I intended to keep walking. Then I heard my name. Everything inside me went still. I moved closer. Carefully. Quietly. Inside the study, Evelyn and Maya sat across from each other. Their expressions were completely different from the smiling masks they wore during dinner. Gone was the warmth. Gone was the affection. What remained was cold calculation. "He is being careful," Maya said. Evelyn slammed a folder onto the desk. "Then we make him less careful." A chill crawled down my spine. I remained motionless, listening. "He has to sign before Monday," Evelyn continued. "The developers are already waiting." Maya looked nervous. "What if he refuses?" "He will not." "And if he does?" For a moment Evelyn said nothing. Then she leaned forward. The smile that appeared on her face made my blood run cold. "Then we use the backup plan." My heart started pounding. Every instinct screamed at me to leave. But I stayed. What I heard next would change everything. "The title search is almost complete," Evelyn said. "Once it finishes, they will discover he is the sole beneficiary." Maya's eyes widened. "Everything. Everything." The room fell silent. I felt as if the floor had vanished beneath my feet. Sole beneficiary? What was she talking about? Aunt Eliza had never mentioned any fortune. Never mentioned hidden wealth. Never mentioned valuable property. Yet Evelyn sounded terrified. Terrified of something being discovered. "How much is the land worth?" Maya asked quietly. Evelyn took a deep breath. "Over $6 million." For a second I thought I had heard wrong. $6 million. The number echoed inside my head. But the shock was only beginning. Because the next thing Evelyn said was far worse. Much worse. If he refuses to cooperate, she whispered, we declare him mentally unstable. Maya stared at her. What? I still have the old reports from when he was 14. A knot formed in my stomach. Reports. The evaluations Evelyn had forced me through before sending me away. The documents she used to convince my father I was a problem. A danger. An inconvenience. She still had them. After all these years. And she intended to use them. Maya looked uneasy. Would that actually work? Evelyn's expression darkened. I already spoke with someone. Someone. A lawyer. The room became deathly quiet. Then Evelyn smiled. A cold smile. The kind predators wear before they strike. And at that exact moment I realized this was never about family. Never about healing. Never about reconciliation. They had invited me to that lodge for one reason. To take everything Aunt Eliza left behind. And if stealing it failed, they were prepared to take my life apart piece by piece until nobody believed a word I said. Standing alone in the dark hallway, I finally understood why Aunt Eliza had spent decades keeping records. Because sometimes the most dangerous people are not strangers. Sometimes they share your last name. And for the first time that night I realized I was not walking into a family reunion. I was standing at the edge of a war. For several seconds I could not move. I stood frozen outside the study while the storm howled against the windows. Every word Evelyn had spoken echoed through my mind. $6 million. Mentally unstable. Backup plan. Lawyer. The pieces were finally coming together. The invitation. The fake kindness. The sudden interest in Aunt Eliza. None of it had anything to do with family. I was never the guest. I was the obstacle. And obstacles were meant to be removed. A younger version of me would have stormed into that room. I would have demanded answers. I would have shouted, accused, fought. But Aunt Eliza had spent 12 years teaching me something far more valuable than anger. Patience. Truth. Evidence. The person who reacts first usually loses. The person who prepares wins. Slowly I pulled my phone from my pocket. My hands trembled. Not from fear. From adrenaline. I started recording. Every word. Every threat. Every plan. Every lie. The conversation continued for nearly 20 minutes. And with each passing second the situation became worse. Far worse. I learned that the developers had already prepared contracts for the coastal property. I learned that Evelyn had promised investors she could secure the land quickly. Most importantly, I learned she had never expected me to inherit anything. For years she believed Aunt Eliza would eventually leave everything to charity. When she discovered I was the sole heir, she panicked. Now she was desperately trying to regain control. When the conversation finally ended, I slipped away before they could notice me. My heart pounded as I returned to my room. The recording sat safely on my phone. Proof. Real proof. The kind no amount of manipulation could erase. Yet something still bothered me. If Aunt Eliza knew they would come after me, why had she never warned me directly? Why leave me vulnerable? Why keep everything secret? Then I remembered the key. The gold-plated key she had placed into my hand during her final days. The memory returned with startling clarity. She had been lying in bed. Weak. Pale. But her eyes remained sharp. Focused. Certain. I remembered sitting beside her while rain tapped softly against the windows. Without explanation, she reached beneath her blanket and handed me a small velvet pouch. Inside was the key. Beautiful. Heavy. Old. I had asked what it opened. She smiled. The future. At the time I thought she was being mysterious. Now I realized she had been preparing me. There was one more thing she had said. Something I had almost forgotten. If the wolves ever start circling, she whispered, call Silas. Silas. The name hit me like a lightning strike. I had not thought about him in years. Occasionally letters arrived from a man named Silas Reed, a friend of Aunt Eliza. The letters were always brief, polite, nothing remarkable. Yet she trusted him enough to mention him on her deathbed. That meant something. I checked the old contacts stored in my phone. To my surprise, his number was still there. It was nearly 2 in the morning. I hesitated. Then I pressed call. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. Then a calm voice answered. Leo. I blinked. He already knew who I was. Silas. I've been expecting your call. Every hair on my arm stood up. I sat upright. What do you mean you've been expecting it? Silas sighed softly. Tell me exactly what happened. For the next 20 minutes I explained everything. The invitation, the lodge, the recording, the threats. When I finished he remained silent. Then he spoke. Your aunt was right. About what? They came sooner than expected. I felt a knot tighten in my chest. You knew this would happen? Not exactly when. But yes. The room suddenly felt smaller. What aren't you telling me? Another pause. Then Silas finally answered. Your aunt spent the last 10 years preparing for this moment. I stared into the darkness. What moment? The moment someone came after you. The words sent a chill through my body. Outside the storm intensified. Snow hammered against the glass. Inside my room everything felt strangely still. Silas continued. Leo, your aunt wasn't simply keeping journals. I frowned. What do you mean? Those ledgers contain evidence. Evidence of what? His answer arrived slowly, as though even he struggled to believe it. Financial crimes. My stomach dropped. What? Your father's company. I sat speechless. Silas continued. Several years before your father died, he became seriously ill. During that time, someone gained access to the company finances. A terrible feeling began forming in my chest. I already knew where this was heading. Who? Evelyn. The name landed like a hammer. For years I had assumed she was selfish, manipulative, cruel. But this was something different. Something far darker. Silas explained how money had quietly disappeared over time. Small amounts at first. Then larger transfers. Accounts hidden behind shell companies. Properties purchased through intermediaries. Millions quietly diverted. All carefully disguised. All carefully hidden. And throughout those years Aunt Eliza had documented everything. Every transaction. Every account. Every discrepancy. Every suspicious payment. She had gathered evidence piece by piece. Patiently. Methodically. Like someone building a case. I leaned forward. If she had all this evidence, why didn't she go to the authorities? Silas sighed. Because she knew the money was only part of the problem. I felt my pulse quicken. What does that mean? It means your aunt believed Evelyn wasn't just stealing from your father. The silence stretched. Then came the words that changed everything. She believed Evelyn engineered your removal from the family. My breath caught. For years I had wondered. For years I had questioned what really happened when I was 14. Why everything changed so suddenly. Why my father stopped listening. Why nobody defended me. Now old memories resurfaced. The meetings. The evaluations. The accusations. The whispers. The way Evelyn always seemed prepared. Almost as if she had planned everything. Silas spoke carefully. Your aunt never found enough evidence to prove it completely. But she believed Evelyn wanted total control of your father's assets. I stared at the wall, trying to process everything. The inheritance. The fraud. The years of manipulation. The possibility that my exile had been orchestrated from the beginning. Suddenly my entire life looked different. Every painful memory. Every lonely birthday. Every unanswered message. Every year spent wondering why I was not enough. What if none of it was my fault? What if I had been removed because I stood in the way? Tears burned behind my eyes. Not from sadness. From anger. The kind of anger that comes when decades of lies finally crack apart. Then Silas said something that stopped me cold. Leo. What? The ledgers are only half of what your aunt left behind. I frowned. What else is there? The key. I looked toward the nightstand where the gold key rested. My heartbeat accelerated. You know what it opens? Yes. For a moment neither of us spoke. Then he delivered the answer. It opens a private vault. My grip tightened around the phone. A vault containing what? Silas took a slow breath. The final piece of evidence your aunt spent 10 years protecting. I stared at the key. The future. That was what Aunt Eliza called it. And suddenly I understood why. Because whatever waited inside that vault had the power to destroy everything Evelyn had built. And for the first time since arriving at Blackwood Lodge, I realized something important. I was not the one trapped. Evelyn was. She just did not know it yet. I barely slept for the rest of the night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Aunt Eliza. I heard her voice. I remembered the way she always seemed 3 steps ahead of everyone else. For years I thought she was simply cautious. Now I understood the truth. She had been preparing for a battle she knew would eventually come. And she had spent a decade making sure I would be ready when it did. At sunrise, the storm finally began to weaken. Gray light filtered through the windows of the lodge. The mountains outside looked buried beneath endless blankets of snow. I sat alone in my room staring at the gold key resting on the table. The future. That was what Aunt Eliza called it. Silas had explained everything before ending the call. The vault was located inside an old private trust office in Portland. Years ago, Aunt Eliza established a secure legal arrangement that would only become accessible after her death. The key was part of that system. The vault contained documents, evidence, records, enough information to expose every secret she had spent years collecting. But there was one problem. The trust office would not open until Monday morning. And Monday was exactly when Evelyn planned to force me into signing away my inheritance. The timing was no coincidence. She believed she was running out of time, which meant she was becoming desperate. Desperate people make mistakes. Aunt Eliza taught me that too. At breakfast, everyone acted normal. Almost. Evelyn smiled too much. Maya laughed too loudly. The performance had become obvious now that I knew the truth. Every friendly gesture felt fake. Every question carried hidden motives. I could see them studying me, watching, measuring, trying to determine whether I suspected anything. So I gave them exactly what they wanted. Nothing. I smiled. I made small talk. I acted relaxed. And all the while I kept my phone safely hidden with the recording stored in multiple locations. By noon, Evelyn approached me privately. "Leo, darling, can we talk?" There it was. The moment she had been waiting for. I followed her into a private sitting room overlooking the snowy valley. A folder already sat on the table. Prepared. Waiting. Like a trap. Evelyn folded her hands together. "You know how much your father loved family." The lie almost made me laugh. She continued before I could respond. "There are some estate matters we should organize. Nothing complicated." She pushed the folder toward me. My eyes dropped to the paperwork. Family Asset Coordination Agreement. The title sounded harmless. The contents were not. Even a quick glance revealed what it really was. A surrender. A legal transfer of authority. If signed, it would give them substantial control over anything connected to Aunt Eliza's estate. Exactly what they wanted. I looked up. Evelyn's smile remained perfectly in place. "Just a formality," she said. I closed the folder. "I'd like more time." For the first time, her expression tightened. Only slightly, but enough. "Of course." The answer sounded pleasant. Her eyes told a different story. I spent the rest of the day pretending to consider the documents. Meanwhile, Silas worked behind the scenes. Throughout the afternoon, he sent updates. Lawyers had been contacted. Forensic investigators were reviewing the ledgers. Authorities were preparing to receive evidence. Everything was moving. Everything was falling into place. And Evelyn had no idea. Sunday passed in a blur of tension. The closer Monday came, the more nervous she became. She checked her phone constantly, made private calls, held whispered conversations with Maya. The pressure was building. Then Monday arrived. The day everything changed. At 9 in the morning, I left the lodge and drove toward Portland. Evelyn insisted on accompanying me. According to her, she wanted to help settle family matters. In reality, she wanted to control the outcome. By noon, we arrived at the trust office. The building looked ordinary from the outside. Simple, professional, quiet. Nothing about it suggested the secrets hidden within. A lawyer greeted us in the lobby. An older woman with sharp eyes and a calm expression. She introduced herself and immediately led us into a conference room. Several sealed boxes already sat on the table. The sight of them made my pulse quicken. Evelyn noticed them too. I watched curiosity flicker across her face. The lawyer placed a document before me. Mr. Leo Blackwood, are you prepared to access the contents entrusted to you by Eliza Blackwood? I nodded. Yes. The lawyer held out her hand. The key. For a moment I simply stared at it. The same key Aunt Eliza had given me. The same key she protected for years. Slowly I handed it over. The lawyer unlocked the first security case. Then the second. Then a reinforced metal box inside. Finally she opened the vault container. Silence filled the room. Inside were dozens of files. Hard drives. Ledgers. Photographs. Signed affidavits. Years of evidence. Years of secrets. Years of preparation. I watched the color drain from Evelyn's face. She knew immediately. Whatever she expected to find was not this. The lawyer began organizing the contents. One folder after another. Each labeled. Each documented. Each verified. The deeper she went, the worse Evelyn looked. Then came the final file. The one Aunt Eliza marked with a red seal. The lawyer opened it carefully. Inside was a signed statement. A personal letter. And evidence connecting years of financial fraud directly to Evelyn. Detailed timelines. Bank records. Witness statements. Everything. The room became completely silent. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Then Evelyn suddenly stood. These documents are fabricated. Her voice shook. The lawyer calmly adjusted her glasses. They have already been independently verified. Evelyn looked toward me. For the first time her mask disappeared completely. No warmth. No kindness. No performance. Only panic. Pure panic. She realized the game was over. But I was not finished. Slowly I opened my phone. Then I pressed play. The recording from the lodge filled the room. Her voice. Maya's voice. Every threat. Every plan. Every word. The room seemed to grow smaller as the recording continued. Nobody interrupted. Nobody needed to. The evidence spoke for itself. When the audio finally ended, silence returned. Heavy. Absolute. Evelyn stared at the table. The confidence she carried for years had vanished. In its place stood someone cornered by the truth. And for the first time in my life, I was not the powerless 14-year-old boy she sent away. I was the man Aunt Eliza prepared me to become. The man holding every piece of the puzzle. The man she could no longer control. The lawyer folded her hands. Then she spoke the words that changed everything. Mrs. Blackwood, representatives from the authorities have been notified. They are waiting downstairs. Evelyn's face went completely white. And in that moment I finally understood something. The inheritance was never the real gift. The real gift was justice. For a long moment nobody moved. The room felt frozen. Outside the conference room windows the city continued as normal. Cars moved through the streets. People walked along sidewalks. Life carried on. But inside that room an entire empire was collapsing. Evelyn sat motionless. The confidence that had carried her through years of manipulation was gone. Every carefully constructed lie had finally reached its end. I looked at her and felt something unexpected. Not satisfaction. Not anger. Not even revenge. Just clarity. For most of my life I had imagined this moment differently. I thought exposing her would heal every wound. I thought justice would erase every lonely birthday. Every unanswered phone call. Every year spent wondering why I was never enough. But standing there I realized something important. Justice does not erase the past. It simply stops the past from controlling the future. The lawyer calmly gathered the evidence. Every document was cataloged. Every file was secured. Every record Aunt Eliza had spent years protecting was finally where it belonged. Safe. Verified. Impossible to ignore. A knock sounded at the door. 2 investigators entered. Professional. Calm. Prepared. They introduced themselves and began speaking with the lawyer. Evelyn attempted to argue. first. Then she demanded explanations. Then she blamed misunderstandings. Then she blamed accountants. Then she blamed circumstances. The excuses came one after another. But none of them mattered anymore. Facts do not care about excuses. Evidence does not care about stories. The truth had finally arrived. And the truth was stronger than all of it. Maya arrived less than an hour later. Someone had informed her of what happened. The moment she entered the room, she knew. Her face turned pale. She looked from the investigators to the documents and finally to her mother. No one needed to explain anything. The situation explained itself. For a brief second, our eyes met. I expected anger. Instead, I saw fear, regret, confusion. Maybe she had known everything. Maybe she only knew part of it. Maybe she spent years believing whatever Evelyn told her. At that moment, it no longer mattered. The consequences were already in motion. By late afternoon, the conference room had emptied. The investigators left with boxes of evidence. Lawyers remained behind handling legal procedures. And for the first time in years, I stepped outside and took a full breath. The air felt different, lighter, as if a weight I had carried since childhood had finally lifted. My phone rang. It was Silas. I answered immediately. How did it go? I looked up at the sky. It is over. For several seconds he remained silent. Then he laughed softly. Not because the situation was funny, because he understood what those words meant. Years of preparation. Years of patience. Years of truth waiting to be heard. Finally over. Your aunt would be proud, he said. Those 5 words hit harder than anything else. My throat tightened. Because out of everything that happened, that was the one thing I wanted most. To make her proud. To prove that everything she taught me mattered. To show her that I listened. A week later, I returned to Maine. The drive home felt completely different from the drive that first brought me there at 14 years old. Back then, I arrived feeling unwanted, abandoned, broken. Now I returned carrying something entirely different. Purpose. The ocean greeted me the same way it always had. Waves crashing against rocky cliffs. Cold wind moving through the pines. The scent of salt in the air. Some things never change. And sometimes that is exactly what makes them beautiful. When I reached Aunt Eliza's house, I sat on the porch for a long time. The garden she planted still bloomed. The old wind chimes still danced in the breeze. For a moment I could almost imagine she was still there, sitting in her favorite chair, watching the ocean, smiling that small knowing smile she always had whenever she was right about something. I walked through every room slowly, remembering the kitchen where she taught me patience, the workshop where she taught me resilience, the desk where she taught me the value of records and truth. Every corner carried part of her story, and part of mine. That night I made a decision that would change the future of the property forever. For years people viewed the house as valuable because of the land, because of the money, because of what developers wanted to build there. But they missed the most important thing. The house had already changed lives, changed mine, and I wanted it to continue doing that. 6 months later, the record house officially opened. The old property became a sanctuary for teenagers who felt forgotten. Kids abandoned by family. Kids pushed aside. Kids told they were not enough. The same kinds of kids I once stood beside. Every room was renovated with care. The gardens expanded. The library grew. Counselors volunteered their time. Mentors offered support. And slowly the house filled with something it had always been meant to hold: hope. On opening day, I placed one item inside a glass display case near the entrance. A single leather-bound ledger. Aunt Eliza's ledger. Below it was a small plaque. It read, "The truth belongs to the one who keeps the records." Every person who entered the building stopped to read those words. Most smiled and moved on. Only I knew how much power those words truly carried. Years passed. The lawsuits ended. The investigations concluded. The developers moved on. The headlines disappeared, as they always do. But something remained. The life Aunt Eliza helped me build. Sometimes people still ask whether I hate my family, whether I regret what happened, whether I wish things had been different. The answer surprises them. No, because hatred would mean they still control part of my life. And they do not. The truth set me free long before it exposed them. What happened to me was painful, but it also led me to the one person who truly loved me. The one person who saw value in me when nobody else did. The one person who transformed a frightened, abandoned teenager into someone capable of standing on his own. Aunt Eliza did not leave me a fortune. Not really. Money was only the smallest part of her gift. She left me wisdom. She left me courage. She left me proof that our worth is not determined by the people who reject us. It is determined by what we choose to become afterward. And that lesson was worth more than every dollar in the estate. Today, when I walk through the record house and hear laughter filling the halls, I sometimes think about that 14-year-old boy standing alone at a bus station. Scared. Confused. Certain that his story was ending. If I could speak to him now, I would tell him the truth. Your story is not ending. It is only beginning. The people who abandon you do not get to decide your future. The people who underestimate you do not get to write your ending. And the people who try to erase you may someday discover that you became stronger in their absence than you ever could have in their presence. Because family is not always the people who share your blood. Family is the people who stay. The people who choose you. The people who help you become who you were always meant to be. And sometimes the greatest inheritance is not money. Sometimes it is the person who teaches you how to survive long enough to discover your own strength. If this story touched your heart, take a moment to like this video and subscribe for more emotional stories of justice, resilience, and hidden truths. Share your thoughts in the comments and tell me where you are watching from and what time it is in your part of the world. Until next time, remember this. Never let someone else hold the pen to your story, because the most powerful chapters are often the ones you write yourself.